And for part 3, we are going to continue our talk on anxiety disorders with obsessive compulsive disorder and related disorders. Now, obsessive compulsive disorder has to have, I know a lot of people use it to think, oh, well, I like things organized. Or, oh, if I don't have my TV volume set at a certain number, I'll just go crazy, right? By the way, we don't use crazy in psychology, it's dismissive. Obsessive compulsive disorder is not just wanting organization. I don't know how many times I've had to tell people this, especially when they joke around with me saying, oh, I'm so OCD. And I go, but are you, Susan? But are you? But anyway, that's neither here nor there. The diagnosis in and of itself is going to have an occurrence of repeated obsessions, compulsions, or both. Obsessions are intrusive thoughts. They can be sexual in nature, they can be violent in nature. They tend to be very scary for the person experiencing these symptoms. And it could be something like they think they're going to hurt a family member, or they're having sex with an inappropriate person, and the imagery kind of just bombards their brain. So obsession is very intrusive. Now, the compulsions are the behavioral components. So these are the behaviors they engage in to try to quell the obsessions. So let's use the common example, because people think of OCD as being like the cleaning kind of disorder. If someone has a severe fear of germs and dying, maybe they're scared that the germs that reside on the doorknob will somehow fester inside of them, right? They will engage in a compulsion that will help ease the anxiety or fear of touching their face afterward, right? So they're going to go, and every time they touch a doorknob, they say, oh, I got to use hand sanitizer. That is a compulsion, right? And there are different things. Sometimes there are religious obsessive compulsive kind of tendencies, and this happens tends to happen more in societies where religion, or cultures where religion is more like enforced, or I shouldn't say enforced, but more of a norm. So let's say someone is scared. I actually had a friend when I was tutoring, when I had a tutoring job, who had religiously focused OCD, and she was always scared of sinning. And so anytime she thought an evil thing, she had an intrusive evil thought, she would pray. Now, sometimes people pray as a part of their normal routine, but this type of prayer she would engage in consistently and for hours a day. And that's the thing about compulsions, they take up so much time, at least an hour a day. And they also cause significant distress or impairment. So if someone has this thought that they consider, this obsession that they consider evil or intrusive, it's going to be distressing. So they're going to engage in the compulsion to alleviate it. Well, if they can't engage in their compulsion properly, that may also cause some severe distress. So let's say someone, when they touch something with their left hand, let's say they have OCD, they may have to touch it equally with their right hand to have a feeling of harmony and balance, right? So there's a lot of like touching behaviors, like, oh, if I smack my left elbow on the table, I have to smack my right elbow on the table. So they're trying to find that balance within their system. And that can take considerable time to try to get everything perfect. And it can cause great distress, especially if it's not executed perfectly or the way that is perfect within their mind. Some common themes of obsessive compulsive disorder: cleaning, that's the one that's cited a lot in popular media. Checking behaviors, so maybe checking the doorknob, checking the stoves, wiggling them, having a certain routine for checking them. Seeking order and balance. Touching, so that's touching in the sense of what they have to touch when. Maybe they can't step on cracks on a sidewalk when they're walking, those kind of things. Verbal and counting behaviors. So a lot of times that obsessive compulsiveness kind of comes with numbers, right? And how people have certain routines for doing things. Maybe they have set number of times they have to do something. Obsessive compulsive, remember, can range in severity. So again, the distressing nature of it is what's one of the important factors for that person, for the individual with the disorder. On the psychodynamic perspectives kind of approach to this, we're looking at, again, those fear impulses. The idea here is that our obsessions are kind of like our fear impulses. Excuse me. I don't know why that's tripping me up. But the idea that those evil little thoughts are in our id and they're making themselves known to us, and our ego defense mechanisms are kind of like the behaviors we use to protect us from those impulses. That's kind of the idea surrounding the psychodynamic perspective as listed in your text. Then we have the cognitive behavioral perspective. Again, we're looking at how those thoughts are occurring, why the person's thinking what they are, and how we can kind of change those thoughts. And the behavioral component, what behaviors are they engaging with? Both very important factors in assessing obsessive compulsive disorder. Another kind of feature of obsessive compulsive disorder, I'll use OCD, is neutralizing thoughts. So this topic is talked about in our text, and I just want to explain it a little bit. This is the idea that people with OCD need reassurance. So if they do something that is out of their ritual or not exactly right, they may seek reassurance from another person or think thoughts that try to neutralize the bad thoughts, counter it. So maybe they think, oh, well, if I don't wash this dish the right way, someone's going to eat off of it and die because I didn't wash it right. And they may turn to their partner, their mom, their sister, whoever, and say, hey, is it okay if I clean this way? It's kind of a way to put that anxiety kind of off of themselves and get that reassurance. That's a neutralizing thought. Okay, they're trying to neutralize the obsessive thoughts that they have. And sometimes that involves asking other people and getting reassurance in different ways. And there's a biological component to OCD. So we talk about twin studies. I think I mentioned in this class. If not, if you took any of my other psych classes, you would have learned about twin studies. Basically, with identical twins, they're the same people genetically. And so any differences in their behaviors we look at, we kind of assume it's nurture, the whole nature versus nurture debate. It depends on what research you're looking at, but that was the early premise. And so with twin studies and looking at people with OCD, we found that gene abnormalities are present in people with OCD, and that it was something like if you were identical twins, when one twin had it, OCD, 50% of the time the other twin did. And I think that is statistically such a large number. That is it still baffles me. But treatment involves exposure response prevention or exposure ritual prevention. So basically, if someone has this doorknob obsession with germs, like I mentioned, where they have to wash their hands or put on hand sanitizer every time they touch a doorknob, ERP, developed by Meyer, would require the person to touch the doorknob and not act out their compulsion. So touching the doorknob, sitting there for 5 seconds or however long the therapist is designated, touching the doorknob and not engaging in their ritual for a certain amount of time. Eventually, they'll kind of let them do it. The clinician will let the person engage in the ritual maybe after a minute. But systematically, you're going to work that time down and say, not at all. You're going to touch the doorknob and not do the ritual at all. So it's a very systematic process, that ERP. And there's also psychopharmacological interventions. Again, antidepressants work very well for OCD. And this could be, kind of helping with, I think serotonin or dopamine. I think dopamine is the big neurotransmitter involved with OCD. Y'all have to correct me on that if I'm wrong. But increasing the efficiency through which those neurotransmitters work in our brain. I've included a video of Howie Mandel. He's a very well-known case of OCD. And this is a really good video that kind of paints a little bit more, a deeper picture of it. But I just wanted to note before you watch that video that not all OCD diagnoses revolve around germ and germ obsessions, because that's kind of like the big one, and they mention it a lot in the video. There are a lot of other OCD rituals and methods people engage in, some of which don't seem to make sense to someone without OCD. And a lot of times people with these anxiety disorders know that these thoughts are irrational. It's not like they believe that if they read this sentence incompletely, someone's going to die. but it's like a feeling. And so they engage in their compulsion anyway because it's kind of like a hindsight bias. Well, see, it worked before. I did this and nothing bad happened. Um, and that's why it kind of reinforces itself. It relieves their anxiety. So now let me go to, oh, and this is a great video on what OCD really means. So a little bit more of what I was saying, debunking the myths of OCD. It's a TEDx talk and it's TED talk, and it's really good. So please check that out. Then we have obsessive compulsive related disorders. So really briefly, these are related to OCD in the sense that they are also obsessions and compulsions, and their behaviors are just so ritualistic in a sense. Not ritualistic, that requires a set. They're just obsessive. So I'll explain and you'll get what I mean. Hoarding disorder. So here's a first picture. You know, this isn't as bad as some people with hoarding disorder can get. But the individuals feel compelled to save items and become distressed if they try to discard them. And this can lead to excessive item accumulation, and this can become disruptive in their everyday life if they're not having people over, or people don't want to come over, they're not socializing, they're not cleaning. That is a big health hazard, and also a fire hazard. You know, if people's houses are so filled with stuff that they can't move, this is impairing their life. I also have a picture on the top right of someone with trichotillomania. It's just a hair pulling disorder. So it's an obsessive, kind of like singular behavior in which they pull out hairs. It's provoked by anxiety, and sometimes it focuses on certain parts. Sometimes people pull out their eyelashes. Sometimes they'll pull out their eyebrows. Sometimes they'll pull out their hair out of their scalp. I mean, wherever you have hair, I'm sure someone with trichotillomania has focused on that one specific region. There's also excoriation disorder, which is just skin picking. I did include a picture of that because it includes having these horrid wounds as a result of the anxiety. But remember, these things are all related to that anxiety or that overarching vague sense of dread and fear. Picking at the skin, so this results in significant wounds or sores. It could be the scalp, it could be anywhere on the body, but I know the scalp is one of the big places. And there's also body dysmorphic disorder. I've included a picture of Michael Jackson because in his life there were many people, and even after his life, many people who believed he had body dysmorphic disorder with the way he focused so much on his appearances and the amount of plastic surgeries that he's had. Sometimes people with body dysmorphic disorder, they are preoccupied with the belief that they have certain defects or flaws in their physical appearance. And so they'll do things to either hide them or change them. You know, sometimes a lot of these people get plastic surgery. And this is more than just like seeing a pimple on your head and looking at it all day. This is people who believe like their nose is crooked. They're just going to look at this nose. And they've gotten maybe 5 surgeries on that nose and it's still crooked. And so they try to hide their nose. Maybe they try to contour it with makeup to make it look differently. Maybe they excessively look in mirrors just to obsess over that flaw they have in their body. That is body dysmorphic disorder. Here's a video I've included from a Hoarders Buried Alive clip, just so you could see this woman's house. It is very overwhelming, and I know sometimes this Hoarders show kind of sensationalizes things, but these are very, very severe cases of hoarding. So check it out. It's only like a minute and a half long. My jaw hit the floor, if I'll be honest. It slammed onto the floor, and you feel so bad because, you know, on a shallow level, we think, oh, how can someone live like this? But then you think, what is going on in this person's mind that they feel the need to have all these things? That they feel like, you know, they need to live like this. They need to shop for a deal to accumulate all these worthless items, right? So I know sometimes when you look at these disorders, they can take us aback for a little bit, and sometimes our knee-jerk is to criticize. But you also have to think that these people have abnormal functioning, and they're ill in some sense. So it's sad in one sense to see how someone can deteriorate like this, like how much a disorder can disrupt their life, that they live in these conditions and think this is acceptable. The last slide, we're going to talk about the developmental psychopathology perspective. Basically what I said in the beginning of clip 1, we're looking at the intersection and context of important factors at key points of time throughout the lifespan. So just how people develop and go through their lives and develop their beliefs, their attitudes, their morals, how they process emotions, all of these things. Sometimes there are disruptions in the process, and we want to find out where these disruptions happen, that someone has this anxiety disorder. So with this developmental psychopathology perspective, we're looking at how it develops over one's lifespan. So the role of parenting styles in the development of anxiety, because a lot of times how parents model their emotional regulation can be effective in kind of having the children act out certain behaviors. I will be candid with you all as someone who has struggled with anxiety myself. I have a psychology background, so I'm very mindful of how I model certain behaviors for my child, because I know that there may be a chance he may have this in the future due to some research and links between genetic factors and all that stuff. But I'm being cognizant in how I model my reactions to different things so that he doesn't have issues with that in the future, because he's already kind of predisposed to it. And so that's the idea. And the temperament is just an enduring, like kind of like personality trait. Kind of like a mood. When someone said someone's a happy baby, have you ever heard that? That's the idea of a temperament, just their overall sense of who that person is. So modeling temperament has a lot to do with how people develop psychopathology. And also, overprotective parenting has been linked to anxiety disorders. And so, the psychobiological or psychodynamic perspective states that children aren't given the appropriate time to develop proper ego responses because the parents tend to swoop in too soon. And CBT therapy kind of looks at it from the same perspective, in the sense that, yes, the parents and parenting styles are overprotective and they are swooping in too soon. But in this sense, they're saying you need to let the child figure out how to deal with their anxieties. Don't deal with it for them. So, for example, if your child is like excessively shy, don't facilitate that anxiety by speaking for them or avoiding scenarios in which they would have to be social. Kind of push them to be a little bit uncomfortable to engage those factors so they don't become debilitating. Then we have the sociocultural model, again, looking how our societal factors affect the development of anxiety. Life stress, peer pressure, poverty, stress in general, school difficulties, community danger, right? If you live in a dangerous neighborhood, all of these factors lend themselves to a propensity to develop anxiety. And we also, last point I'm going to mention, these variables are two-directional. We don't know if A causes B or B causes A. So, for example, we don't know if a brain abnormality is going to cause OCD, or if OCD affects certain parts of the brain differently. We don't know which one comes first. We just know there's a few variables. We kind of have to draw from different perspectives to paint a better picture of anxiety. That's all I have for this lecture. I know it's really long, so good job keeping on. You all are doing great, and let me know if you have any questions. Have a good week.